When we read our Bibles carefully, we will notice that there are two different creation narratives found in Genesis 1 and 2. As we discussed in episode 15, the first creation account, Genesis 1, has some similarities to the Babylonian creation myth of Enuma Elish. In this episode, we will look at the second creation account of Genesis 2 and the flood narratives of Genesis 6 to 9. There are quite a lot of similarities, but also a few differences between these biblical narratives and the Sumerian Epic of Gilgamesh. The first similarity is the creation of Adam in Genesis 2 and Enkidu in the Epic of Gilgamesh. Both these characters were created out of clay. Enkidu was created out of clay in a place called Eden. Notice the similarity to the Garden of Eden. While Yahweh created Adam from the dust of the ground, he breathed the breath of life into the man's nostrils, and the man became a living person. Both Adam and Enkidu were at one with nature. Enkidu ran with the wild animals in perfect harmony. Adam lived among the animals and could feast on all the fruit within the garden, except for the tree of knowledge of good and evil. As Enkidu became civilized through his sexual encounter with the woman, Adam gained his own knowledge of the world through eating from the forbidden fruit, also believed to be a sexual act by some scholars. Both men and Eve were banned from their primitive environments. Enkidu had to leave Eden as the animals ran away from him in fear, and Adam was banned from the Garden of Eden. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, Enkidu and Gilgamesh went on many adventures of which we find no similarities in the Old Testament. It is only after Enkidu's death in Book 10, when Gilgamesh visited Utnapishtim, that this epic links back to the flood narratives of Genesis 6 to 9. Utnapishtim told Gilgamesh how he survived the great flood by building a boat which would carry himself, his wife, and the seeds of all living beings. After the rain and water subsided, Utnapishtim first released a dove, then a swallow, and then a raven to check for dry land. These events are remarkably similar to the Old Testament flood narrative. Interestingly, as with the Epic of Enuma Elish, the reason given why humanity should be erased was because they were a nuisance to the gods. The authors of Genesis 6 to 9 separate themselves from this reasoning. For the biblical authors, the reason why Yahweh destroyed all of earth was not because of a whim, but because humanity was evil. It was a moral decision. Utnapishtim told Gilgamesh of a plant that will immortalize him, a plant he managed to find but was stolen from him by a snake. We also read of a snake in Genesis 2, but this snake was linked to the tree of knowledge of good and evil, not to the tree of life. This is quite an important plot twist in Genesis, and some scholars think that the biblical authors intentionally distanced themselves from the tree of life, thereby redirecting the focus of the narrative to morality instead of immortality. Not only is it important to see the differences and similarities between all the myths and the biblical narratives, but it is also important to see the differences within the biblical narratives themselves. In the next episode, we will look at the differences and similarities between the creation narratives of Genesis 1 and 2.